I used to think the deepest betrayal a marriage could suffer was infidelity. I was so incredibly wrong. If David had just been sleeping with another woman, I wouldn't be sitting in a cheap motel room right now, typing this out on a burner phone, terrified that the heavy footsteps outside my door aren't human. To understand how this nightmare happened, you need to understand who David is. My husband is a senior engineer at a highly classified, private tech firm in Silicon Valley. His department handles government contracts, artificial intelligence, and next-generation robotics. David's entire personality revolves around efficiency. He is a sterile, calculating perfectionist. Every aspect of our home was automated, optimized, and spotless. The only variable in his perfectly controlled world that he couldn't program was Max. Max was my golden retriever. I adopted him 3 years before David and I even met. Max was the absolute light of my life. He was clumsy, he was loud, he left golden hairs on the expensive velvet furniture, and he always smelled like wet dirt after it rained. He was a living, breathing, messy creature full of unconditional love. I loved him more than anything, but David merely tolerated him. Whenever David looked at Max, he didn't see a pet. I would catch him staring at the dog from across the living room with this cold, analytical, deadpan expression, like he was observing a faulty piece of machinery that was creating too much friction in his home. He used to make these passive-aggressive jokes about how much easier life would be if someone invented a synthetic dog that didn't shed or require vet bills. I always laughed it off. I never, in my wildest nightmares, thought he was taking that as a literal challenge. Everything changed exactly 32 days ago. I received a frantic phone call from my sister. Our mother had suffered a massive, life-threatening stroke. I needed to pack a bag immediately and fly across the country to sit by her hospital bed. I was a wreck, hazed into a suitcase, barely able to breathe. I wanted to bring Max with me. He was my emotional support. I was crying, throwing clothes into a suitcase, barely able to breathe. I wanted to bring Max with me. He was my emotional support. But David stopped me at the door. He placed his hands firmly on my shoulders, looked me dead in the eyes, and used that calm, authoritative voice of his. He told me the hospital environment would be too stressful for a dog. He promised he would take perfect care of Max. He swore on our marriage that they would be absolutely fine. In my state of panic, I believed him. So, I got in the Uber, and I left. I was gone for exactly 3 weeks. During those 21 days, I called David every single night from the hospital cafeteria. Whenever I asked to see Max, David always had a perfectly logical excuse. He was sleeping. He was out in the yard. He was eating. David would occasionally text me photos to prove he was taking care of him. But looking back at those pictures now, they make my blood run completely cold. The photos were always taken from a bizarre distance. Max was always lying on his orthopedic bed in the corner of the room, usually with the lights dimmed. There were no videos of him wagging his tail. No sound of him barking in the background of our phone calls. Just this hollow, sterile silence. By the end of the 3rd week, my mom was finally stabilized, and I flew back home. I was mentally exhausted, physically drained, and just desperate to bury my face in my dog's fur. I unlocked the front door and dropped my bags in the hallway. Usually, the exact second my keys jingled in the lock, Max would come sliding across the hardwood floors, barking happily, jumping up to lick my face. But the house was dead silent. It didn't even smell like our house anymore. The faint, familiar scent of dog was completely gone. Instead, the air smelled sharp, like ozone, lithium, and industrial bleach. David walked out of the kitchen. He was wearing a perfectly pressed shirt, and he had this tight, unnatural smile plastered across his face. He kissed my cheek and told me it was good to have me back. I immediately asked where Max was. David's smile didn't reach his eyes as he pointed toward the living room. I walked into the room, and my heart just skipped a beat. Max was sitting right in the middle of the expensive Persian rug, but his posture was entirely wrong. Dogs slouch, they shift their weight. But Max was sitting perfectly upright, totally motionless, with his spine completely rigid. When I stepped into his field of view, his head snapped toward me. It wasn't a natural fluid movement. It was a sharp, mechanical click. He stared right at me, but he didn't run over. His tail didn't wag. His chest wasn't heaving with excitement. He just stared, and he didn't blink. I dropped to my knees and called his name, holding my arms out. Nothing. I crawled over to him and put both my hands on the sides of his face. The moment my skin touched his fur, a wave of pure, absolute nausea washed over me. You know exactly what a living creature feels like. You know the radiating body heat, the subtle vibrations of their pulse, the softness of their ears. This thing was freezing cold. The fur looked exactly like Max's. The exact same golden shade, the exact same white patch on his chest. But it felt coarse. It felt synthetic, like running your hands over a high-end Halloween mask. I looked up at David. my voice trembling. I asked him what was wrong with my dog. I told him he felt like ice. David was just standing in the doorway, his arms crossed behind his back, observing me. He didn't look concerned. He looked fascinated. He calmly stated that he had given him a cold bath right before I got home, and the air conditioning had been blasting all day. He told me he had spent the last 3 weeks intensely training him. I wanted to believe my husband. I desperately wanted to believe that the trauma of almost losing my mother was just making me paranoid. But the next 3 days turned my own home into a psychological prison. It started with his food and water. I filled Max's giant water bowl to the brim. After a full 24 hours, not a single drop was missing. When I confronted David about it, he casually mentioned he had switched Max to a highly hydrated, raw meat diet, so he didn't need to drink water anymore. But it was the nights that finally broke my sanity. Living things breathe irregularly. They sigh, they twitch in their sleep, they snore, their heart rates fluctuate. But the thing sleeping on the floor next to my side of the bed didn't do any of that. I lay awake in the pitch black, staring at the ceiling, listening to it. It breathed in a perfect, unbreakable, mathematical rhythm. Exactly 60 breaths a minute. It was a metronome. And when the house was dead quiet, I swear to God, I could hear a faint high-pitched mechanical worry sound vibrating deep inside his chest cavity. Every time I tried to voice my terror to David, he gaslit me with absolute perfection. He would pull me into a hug, stroke my hair, and tell me I was having a trauma response. He even printed out a list of local psychiatrists and left it on the kitchen counter. He had me entirely convinced that I was losing my mind. Until yesterday morning, David had to go into the office for an urgent board meeting. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I ran to the fridge. I grabbed a massive chunk of raw steak. The real Max would have completely lost his mind over this. I walked into the living room. The dog was sitting in the exact same spot, staring blankly at the wall. I held the raw meat right up to his nose. Nothing, no drool, no sniffing. His pupils didn't even dilate. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely hold the grooming scissors I had grabbed from the bathroom. I fell to my knees next to him. I whispered his name, begging him to just look at me like a normal dog. He remained perfectly still. I grabbed a thick handful of fur right at the base of his neck. I pulled hard, expecting him to yelp. Nothing. I jammed the scissors into the fur and cut a massive chunk away. What I saw underneath made the blood freeze in my veins. There was no pink skin. There were no pores. There was no blood. It was a pale, seamless layer of thick, industrial-grade silicone. I started hyperventilating. I dug my fingernails deep into the silicone layer and pulled with all my strength. It gave way with this sickening, synthetic tearing sound. I was staring directly into a matte black, titanium chassis. Thousands of microscopic wires were woven together like artificial veins. And right where his spine should have been, there was a glowing red LED light pulsing gently next to a USB charging port. I scrambled backward on the floor, clamping both hands over my mouth so I wouldn't scream. It wasn't my dog. It was a military-grade drone, wearing my dead dog's face. Pure, unadulterated adrenaline took over. I sprinted up the stairs and kicked open the door to David's home office. I had never invaded his privacy before, but I tore the room apart. I ripped out drawers, dumped file cabinets on the floor, and smashed open his locked desk drawer with a heavy paperweight. At the very bottom, hidden under old tax returns, was a thick red folder. The label on the front read, Project Lazarus. Field Test 01. I ripped it open. The first dozen pages were highly classified blueprints of the exact mechanical skeleton sitting down in my living room. But it was the document at the very back that completely destroyed my reality. It was a legally binding contract between David and his venture capitalist investors. The document stated that David would only receive his next $25 million funding round if he could prove that his artificial intelligence disguise was flawless in a real-world environment. He had to prove that his robotic clone could live in close proximity to a human target for 30 days without the human ever realizing the biological asset had been replaced. I was the target. My grief was his laboratory. And stapled to the very back of the contract was a receipt from a 24-hour veterinary clinic. The date on the receipt was the exact same day I flew out to see my sick mom. The charge was for an anonymous, disposal euthanasia. David hadn't just given my dog away. He had dragged a perfectly healthy, happy golden retriever into a clinic and put him down just to make room for his prototype. He murdered my best friend for a promotion, and then watched me pet a machine for 3 days, taking notes on my psychological reactions like a psychopath. Before I could even process the horror, I heard the electronic lock on the front door click open. David was home early. Honey, his voice echoed up the stairs. It sounded so normal, so calm and caring. I was paralyzed. I couldn't breathe. Then, the house went dead silent. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps moving toward the stairs, but they weren't the soft thuds of a man in dress shoes. They were 4 heavy, metallic strikes hitting the hardwood floor. Clack, clack, clack. "Honey," David called out again. But his voice had completely changed. The caring husband was gone. It was flat, cold, and dead. "Why is the silicone casing on model for damaged?" The metallic footsteps started climbing the stairs, moving way too fast for any normal animal. "Project Lazarus does not tolerate the destruction of company property," David yelled, his voice sounding closer now. "I didn't think." I grabbed the red folder, smashed the glass window of the office with the lamp, and crawled out onto the sloping roof of the porch. I slid down, dropped into the bushes, and ran to my car like a madwoman. I drove straight to the police station. But this is where the true nightmare begins. When the police arrived at the house 2 hours later, David was sitting on the couch drinking coffee. The metallic dog was gone. In its place was a brand new, terrifyingly realistic story. David handed the cops the therapist brochures. He showed them fake text messages he had fabricated, making me look violently unhinged. He told the police I had a psychotic break from my mother's stroke, ran away, and stole his highly confidential work documents. The police didn't believe me about the robot dog. They looked at me like I was insane. I am currently hiding in a motel 3 towns over. I have the folder. I have the blueprints. I have the euthanasia receipt. I am leaking all of this to the press tomorrow morning. I don't know what protocols are programmed into that machine, or what David plans to do when he finds my location. But I will not let him get away with murdering my best friend. If you found out your partner did something this psychologically evil for money, what would you have done?